My son called me. "Dad, I'm getting married tomorrow. I withdrew all the money from your bank accounts and sold the house. Don't worry, you'll be fine." His voice was so casual, like he hadn't just stolen my entire life savings. I just laughed out loud. He didn't know that the house he sold for $890,000 was actually... Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I want to see how many fathers and sons are hearing this story. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon in October. I was in my home office reviewing old blueprints when my phone rang. Dad Bryce said, his voice bright with something I'd later recognize as adrenaline. "I'm getting married this Saturday. I took everything from your accounts. Don't worry, you'll be fine." The line went dead before I could speak. I sat there, phone still pressed to my ear. 64 years on this earth, and I'd never heard those words arranged that way. My son, my only son, the boy I'd raised alone since he was 15 after Nora died, calling to tell me he'd robbed me blind. Eventually, my architect's mind, trained over 37 years to solve problems, step by step clicked into gear. First step confirmed the damage. I opened my laptop and logged into my bank account. When the numbers appeared, my chest tightened. Savings account $800. That morning it held $240,000. Checking account $8,000 and change. $240,000 gone. That wasn't just money. It was Nora's life insurance payout after 6 months of watching her die of cancer. It was decades of careful saving, every dollar a choice repair, instead of replace no vacations, leftovers instead of restaurants. It was meant to be my security proof I'd never burden anyone in old age. The irony was sharp. I'd saved that money so I wouldn't have to rely on my son, and he'd taken it anyway. I stared at Bryce's name in my call history. My thumb hovered over the callback button, but I already knew better. You don't call someone who's just stolen $250,000 and expect honesty. Not after they say, "Don't worry, you'll be fine," as if I were the problem. I stood and walked into the kitchen steadier than I should have been. October light faded through the windows, turning the house gold in that quiet autumn way. On the mantel, Nora smiled from a photo taken at the coast 20 years earlier. Before cancer. Before she made me promise to protect what we built. "Keep the house safe," she'd said, squeezing my hand with what strength she had left. "It's bigger than us, Patrick." I'd promised, and I'd kept it. A smile formed small at first, then certain. Because standing there $240,000 poorer, I realized something Bryce didn't know. He thought he'd planned everything. Thought he'd learned how to access my accounts, forge what he needed, and design the perfect theft. He was probably already spending the money in his head, an impressive wedding, a polished start to married life. But he'd forgotten something essential, something architects never forget. Every structure rests on a foundation, and the foundation of this house, of everything I owned, wasn't what Bryce believed. I picked up my phone and scrolled to Graham Ellis. Graham had been our family lawyer for 25 years. He helped Nora and me plan our estate. He knew exactly what my son had just stepped into. The phone rang twice. "Patrick, is everything all right?" "Graham," I said calmly in a tone that worried him more than panic ever could. "I need you first thing tomorrow morning." My son made a serious mistake. A pause. How serious? I looked around the Victorian house, its crown molding intact, its bones standing strong for over a century. Outside, Portland rain began tapping the windows like a countdown. The kind, I said, that teaches a lesson I should have taught long ago. Architects always build backup plans. The next morning, Wednesday, I drove through Portland's autumn drizzle to Graham's downtown office. The wedding was 3 days away, 3 days to understand what my son had done. Graham Ellis had been our family lawyer for 25 years. He was waiting with coffee and 2 manila folders that looked ominous in the gray morning light. "Let me see what we're dealing with," he said, sliding on his reading glasses. I watched him work through my bank records. After 10 minutes, his expression had gone from concern to something harder. "Patrick Bryce used a power of attorney to access your accounts. When did you execute that?" "I didn't." His jaw tightened. "Then this is forgery, an elder financial abuse under Oregon law." He pulled another document. "There's more. He filed a quitclaim deed yesterday transferring the Victorian house to himself." The room felt smaller. I signed nothing. Graham nodded slowly. "Do you remember what we set up 20 years ago? You and Nora?" And suddenly, I was back in this same office, Nora's hand in mine. She'd been fierce that day, insistent in a way that had surprised me. "We need to protect the house, Patrick High," she'd said. "Your parents established that trust for a reason. It's bigger than us. It's history architecture, something that should outlive us both. I'd been reluctant. It seemed excessive. But Graham had explained it carefully. My parents had created the Historic Preservation Trust 50 years earlier, when Portland's Victorians were being demolished. After they died, I'd become the life tenant. I could live there, maintain it, love it. But I couldn't sell it, mortgage it, or give it away. When I died, the house would pass to the Portland Architecture Foundation to become a museum and education center. "Promise me you'll never change this," Nora had said, squeezing my hand. "It's our legacy." I'd promised. Even through years when selling would have been easier when money was tight, I'd kept my word. Graham's voice brought me back. "Patrick Bryce can't sell what you don't own. The quitclaim deed is legally void." "But completely. You're listed as life tenant, not owner. He transferred rights that don't exist." Graham pulled out another document. "But he's already signed a purchase agreement with a buyer. $890,000. Closing was scheduled in 25 days. The number stunned me. Someone's paying that... was paying. I contacted the title company this morning, Stephen Kaufman. They've frozen the closing. Graham's expression was grim. When the buyer discovers the fraud, they'll sue Bryce for everything. Breach of contract fraud, possibly criminal charges. I stared at the papers spread across his desk. $240,000 stolen. $890,000 in fraudulent sales. Over $1 million in crimes. My son hadn't made a mistake. He'd orchestrated a calculated theft from his own father. "What do you want to do?" Graham asked quietly. I looked out the window at Portland, waking up under its blanket of clouds. Somewhere out there, Bryce was planning his wedding, oblivious that his perfect crime was collapsing. I thought of Nora, of the promise I'd made, of the house that had stood for 100 years and would stand for 100 more, of the foundation, literal and metaphorical, that my son had tried to destroy. 3 days until the wedding. 3 days to decide what kind of father I would be. Saturday arrived, 4 days after that phone call that changed everything. I put on my only suit, the charcoal one I'd worn to Nora's funeral, and drove west toward West Hills, where Portland's old money lives. The Westbrook estate sprawled across 5 acres. Valet's circular drive, 200 guests under crystal chandeliers. Ice sculptures, string quartet, floral arrangements that probably cost more than my monthly pension. I stood near the back in my 15-year-old suit and felt every year of it. The garden ceremony was elegant and cold. Bryce in a designer tuxedo beside him, Quinn Westbrook, 28, blonde, beautiful in a way that made you think of expensive knives. When her eyes swept the crowd during the vows they were calculating, measuring, pricing everything they touched. Bryce never once looked in my direction. At the reception, I took a glass of water and stationed myself near the bar. Quinn found me within 20 minutes. "Mr. Ashford," her smile was practiced, "I'm so glad you could make it." "Congratulations." Bryce told me about the house sale. Very smart move. She sipped champagne like we were discussing weather. That old Victorian was just sitting there. Such a waste of valuable real estate. I kept my voice even. "Did Bryce explain how the sale works?" "He handled all the details. You don't need to worry about legal complications." Her tone was dismissive, like I was a child being told the adults would take care of things. "Bryce is very thorough when it comes to business." Thorough. The word hung between us. I saw it clearly. Then she'd encouraged this. Maybe even planned it. Bryce might have made the calls, but Quinn had drawn the blueprint. "We'll put it to excellent use," she continued. "Bryce deserves to start his marriage properly." It wasn't a request for understanding. It was a statement from someone who'd never been told no. An hour later, Bryce pulled me aside to a terrace overlooking the grounds. "Dad, isn't this incredible?" His face was bright with champagne and victory. "Quinn's family really knows how to do things. Bryce, we need to talk about what you did." The brightness dimmed instantly. "I knew you'd make this difficult. Quinn's family has expectations. I can't show up with nothing. I raised you to earn what you have, to have integrity." "That's easy to say when you're living in the past." His voice went cold. "Your time is over, Dad. This is my future, built on stolen money." He shrugged like it was simple math. "You don't need it. You're retired. The house is too big for you anyway. It makes sense. No apology, no shame. Just the entitled logic of someone who thought stealing from his father was reasonable planning." I looked at this stranger wearing my son's face. "You're right about one thing. This is your future, what you make of it." He smiled, completely missing the point. I left at 9, the party still roaring. Sat in my truck in the parking lot, watching well-dressed people laugh through lit windows. Somewhere in there, my son was celebrating what he thought was his cleverness. I pulled out my phone and called Graham. File everything I said when he answered. Police report for the theft, a fraud claim for the house sale. All of it. Graham was quiet for a moment. You're certain? I thought of Bryce's cold dismissal, of Quinn's calculating eyes, of Nora asking me to protect what we'd built. I'm certain. I drove home through dark Portland streets, past the Victorian house that had stood for over a century. The house Bryce thought he'd sold. The house that would still be standing long after this wedding was forgotten. My son was about to learn what every architect knows: structures built on lies always collapse. Monday morning came. I made coffee and waited. Graham had filed everything a police report for the theft, a fraud claim with the title, Company in Notice to the Buyer. The legal machinery was turning, and there was no stopping it. I felt strangely calm. I'd made my choice. The call came Tuesday morning, 3 rings before I answered. Dad Bryce's voice was high and panicked. What did you do? The title company called me Stephen Kaufman, saying there's a problem with the house sale. I sipped my coffee and let him talk. They're talking about some trust. They said the deed is invalid. The house is held in a historic preservation trust, Bryce. I said evenly, I'm only a life tenant. I don't legally own it, and I can't transfer it. What? No, the house is yours. I checked the records. You checked the address. You didn't check the title structure. Silence, then anger. You're lying. You're sabotaging my marriage. I'm stopping you from committing fraud. The line went dead. I stood by the window, rain streaking the glass. Somewhere in Portland, my son was realizing his perfect crime had a fatal flaw. He'd learned how to forge documents and empty accounts. He never verified that the house he sold was actually mine to sell. Wednesday afternoon, tires screeched into my driveway. Bryce burst through the door. He still had a key with Quinn close behind. Their faces were flushed with rage and fear. Dad, fix this, Bryce shouted. Tell them you approved everything. I faced them in my living room. I can't approve what's illegal. Quinn stepped forward. The sweet bride was gone, replaced by something cold. Do you know what you're doing? You're ruining your son's life over paperwork. Over theft, I said quietly. Over fraud, over betrayal. I'm your only son, Bryce yelled. Doesn't that matter? I looked at him. The man I raised alone, worked for, taught integrity. Nora was my only wife. You stole her life insurance. She died believing that money would protect us. The words hit hard. Bryce went pale. Quinn narrowed her eyes. My father has the best lawyers in Portland. We'll bury you. Try, I said. I have 30 years of records and a trust older than your marriage, however long that lasts. Her face twisted. You'll regret this. When Bryce is in prison and your relationship is gone, remember, you chose this. No, I said. Bryce chose it when he robbed me. They slammed the door and left. Silence filled the house. My heart raced, but my hands were steady. Their car sped away. My phone buzzed. Graham texted Detective Julia. Ramsey will call tomorrow. The buyer's attorney sent Bryce a demand letter. It's moving. I replied, good. I stood in the doorway of the house. Nora and I loved. Threats echoed, accusations lingered. But I felt certainty. I thought about the years after Nora died, the quiet dinners, the long nights drawing plans, believing honesty mattered. I had given Bryce every advantage I could afford, every lesson I believed in. Still standing there, I knew mercy now would only teach him that theft had no consequences at all. It would rot whatever remained of him and of me faster than any prison sentence ever could in the end. I'd spent my career designing buildings to withstand time and stress. Solid foundations endure. My son built his future on lies. Now he would learn what every architect knows: when a foundation cracks, everything falls. The following week, Detective Julia Ramsey called. Mr. Ashford, we need to talk. This case has layers we didn't expect. I met her at the Portland Police Bureau downtown. She was mid-40s, sharp-eyed, the kind of person who noticed everything. She laid out a file folder between us like she was presenting evidence at trial. The power of attorney document Bryce used was forged, she said. The notary seal belongs to someone whose license expired 3 years ago. We traced it. The notary was in California on the date this was supposedly signed. I stared at the document. My signature looked right, but something about it felt wrong. We need to establish how he obtained your personal information, Detective Ramsey continued. When did he have access to your documents? Your social security card identification. I thought back, my mind sorting through months. Then it hit me. April. I had minor surgery. Bryce visited me in the hospital. Did you sign anything while you were there? The memory came back slowly, filtered through pain medication and exhaustion. Bryce in my hospital room, sympathetic and helpful. Papers on a clipboard. He said they were insurance forms. Updates for my coverage. I was on morphine. I could barely focus. Detective Ramsey's expression hardened. He exploited your medical vulnerability. That's not just theft, Mr. Ashford. That's elder financial abuse, a felony with enhanced penalties under Oregon law. The word hit me like cold water. Abuse. My own son had planned this for months, waited until I was weakest, and used my trust against me. We're building charges for grand theft, forgery, fraud, and elder abuse, she said. I've also brought in an expert. Dr. Gerald Simpson arrived with a magnifying glass and 2 documents. He was maybe 60 precise in his movements, like a surgeon. Mr. Ashford, this is your genuine signature from your driver's license. He placed them side by side. Notice the consistent pressure, the natural flow. Now look at this power of attorney signature. See these hesitation marks, the uneven pressure. This was traced or copied, not signed freely. He pointed to the date stamp. April 15th. Your hospital records show you were in surgery that morning. You couldn't have signed this. The evidence was airtight. Bryce hadn't just stolen from me, he'd orchestrated it with cold precision. There's more, Detective Ramsey said. The buyer threatening to sue Bryce, it's one of Edward Westbrook's development companies. I almost laughed. The irony was brutal. His father-in-law was his father-in-law. Quinn Westbrook filed for annulment 3 days ago. The marriage lasted less than 2 weeks. She slid another document across. The attorney William Drake is representing Westbrook Development. They're suing Bryce for $890,000 plus $200,000 in damages, over $1 million. Quinn had calculated everything down to the dollar, and the moment it fell apart, she'd vanished back to her family's money. There's one bright spot, Detective Ramsey said. Ruth Sinclair from the Portland Architecture Foundation called. She wants to testify about the trust's historical significance. She said, and I'm quoting, "That house represents more than one family. We'll make sure the court understands that." I drove home through afternoon traffic, my hands tight on the wheel. The scope of what Bryce had done kept expanding, the premeditation, the exploitation, the lies upon lies. At a red light, I pulled out my phone. A text from Graham. Ada wants to meet tomorrow. They're moving forward with prosecution. Are you ready? I looked out at Portland, at the city Nora and I had built our life in, at the Victorian house waiting at the end of my drive, still standing after everything. I texted back, I'm ready. The call came at 6 in the morning. I knew what it was before I answered. Mr. Ashford, this is Detective Ramsey. I wanted you to hear it from me first. We've arrested your son. 18 days had passed since Bryce called about his wedding. 18 days since I learned who he'd become. Now, on a Monday morning in early November, the consequences had caught him. Where is he? I asked, my voice steady despite the tightness in my chest. Multnomah County Jail. He was arrested at his apartment an hour ago. She paused. Quinn wasn't there. She's been gone a while. Of course she had. Quinn Westbrook had annulled the marriage less than 2 weeks after the wedding, the moment her father's lawsuit landed. She left before the damage reached her. What are the charges? I already knew, but I needed to hear them. First-degree grand theft, forgery, elder financial abuse, fraud. Detective Ramsey sounded professional, but kind. Bail is $200,000. I doubt he can post it. $200,000, the same amount he stole from me. The symmetry was bitter. Thank you for telling me. Mr. Ashford, she added, you did the right thing. Exploiting you while you were recovering from surgery. Forging documents, trying to sell property he didn't own, that's calculated abuse. Holding him accountable protects others. After the call, I sat at the kitchen table while my coffee went cold. Bryce was in jail. My son, the boy I taught to ride a bike and helped with homework, was sitting in a cell, and I'd set the process in motion. 2 days later, I met Assistant District Attorney Samantha Reed at the courthouse. She was sharp-eyed and calm with the confidence of someone seasoned. Graham Ellis sat beside me. I'll be direct, Samantha said, opening files. We have an exceptionally strong case. A forged power of attorney with an expired notary seal. Bank records showing unauthorized transfers. Medical records proving you were incapacitated when those documents were supposedly signed. And the attempted sale of trust property your son had no right to transfer. She met my gaze. This isn't a gray area. In Oregon, elder financial abuse carries enhanced penalties. What sentence are we looking at? Graham asked. 7 to 10 years plus restitution of the full $240,000 in damages to the buyer. Possibly more if civil action continues. She paused. Your son's public defender will push for a plea. I'm recommending trial. These cases matter. When would it be? I asked. 2 weeks. Elder abuse cases can be expedited. She leaned forward. I need you to testify what he did, how he exploited you, and how he showed no remorse. Graham looked at me. Could I condemn my own son? I remembered Bryce's voice on that first call, casual, entitled, Don't worry, you'll be fine. I remembered Quinn's cold certainty Bryce deserves a proper start. I'll testify, I said. Samantha nodded. His choices brought him here. You're just telling the truth. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I saw Bryce at 5 stacking blocks. At 12, grieving after Nora died. At 22, smiling at graduation. Had I failed him, been too soft? Then I remembered the wedding, his anger when the fraud unraveled Quinn's words. You don't need that house anymore. Bryce hadn't made a mistake. He'd made deliberate choices, stealing while I was vulnerable, forging documents, selling what wasn't his, and demanding I fix it. Nora used to say, don't let someone hurt you, because you feel obligated to save them. Love isn't enabling. 2 weeks until trial. 2 weeks to prepare for the hardest testimony of my life. Yet as sleep finally came, I felt peace. Bryce's choices did this, not mine. I was just telling the truth. 2 weeks later, on a gray Thursday morning, I stood outside the Multnomah County Courthouse. The building felt heavier than any structure I'd ever designed, all that stone and concrete pressing down with the weight of judgment. Graham Ellis touched my arm. You ready? I wasn't sure anyone could ever be ready for this, but I nodded. Courtroom 4 was smaller than I expected. Judge Sandra Mitchell presided, mid-60s, sharp-eyed, known for efficiency and little patience for theatrics. I sat behind the prosecution table with Graham. Across the aisle, Bryce sat beside his public defender, Jason Mills. My son looked thin in his orange jail uniform, his face, hollow eyes, empty. He didn't look at me. I wasn't sure whether that was mercy or punishment. Ruth Sinclair from the Portland Architecture Foundation sat quietly in the gallery behind me, her presence a small anchor. A few reporters filled the back row pens, ready. The state calls Emily Novak, ADA Samantha Reed announced. The bank representative took the stand, visibly shaken. I processed the transfer based on the power of attorney he presented. She testified. It appeared legitimate. I should have verified it more carefully. Her voice wavered. I'm sorry, Mr. Ashford. I nodded. She had been deceived too. Next came Dr. Gerald Simpson, the handwriting expert. He displayed 2 signatures side by side. The forgery is clear, he explained, pointing to subtle inconsistencies. The notary seal belonged to a license that expired 3 years ago. The hesitation marks indicate tracing. Stephen Kaufman from the title company followed. He explained the quitclaim deed Bryce filed was invalid from the start. Mr. Ashford never had authority to transfer the property. It's held in a historic preservation trust. He's only a life tenant. Detective Julia Ramsey testified last calm and precise. The evidence shows Mr. Bryce Ashford obtained his father's documents, while Mr. Ashford was recovering from surgery. This was calculated exploitation, not opportunity. Jason Mills attempted cross-examination, but there was little room to maneuver. The defense rested quickly. Bryce didn't testify. Then Samantha called my name. The state calls Patrick Ashford. My legs felt unsteady as I approached the stand. I swore to tell the truth and sat down. 12 jurors watched me closely. Samantha's voice softened. Mr. Ashford, tell the jury about your wife Nora. Nora died 6 years ago, I said. She was careful with money. Every dollar represented sacrifice and planning. The $240,000 your son took, what did it mean to you? It was Nora's life insurance, I said quietly. Money she believed would secure our future. Did you give your son permission to take it? No. Permission to sell the house? I couldn't. The house isn't mine to sell. It's held in trust. She asked about raising Bryce alone, about long hours, lessons, values. I taught him to read blueprints, I said, to build honestly. I thought I taught him integrity. I was wrong. One juror wiped her eyes. Jason Mills's cross-examination was brief and gentle. He released me quickly. Samantha's closing was direct. This isn't a family dispute. It's exploitation, forgery, and fraud. The defense's response sounded hollow. The jury deliberated 90 minutes. Guilty, they said again and again. Bryce's face collapsed. Tears fell silently. As he was led away, he looked at me pleading. I looked away. Judge Mitchell set sentencing for 2 weeks. The gavel fell. It was over. 2 weeks after the verdict, I returned to the courthouse. The sentencing hearing felt more intimate, more final. Same courtroom, same bench. Judge Sandra Mitchell presided. Graham sat beside me. Across the aisle, Bryce stood in his orange uniform, thinner than before, eyes red and exhausted. Stephen Kaufman from the title company spoke first, describing the administrative damage Bryce's fraud caused. We were forced to change verification procedures. The exposure to liability was significant. Attorney William Drake, representing Edward Westbrook's firm, was harsher. The defendant signed a purchase agreement for $890,000 with no legal authority. We are pursuing full civil damages. Ruth Sinclair from the Portland Architecture Foundation followed. That Victorian home is part of Portland's architectural heritage. The defendant tried to erase that legacy for personal gain. Then it was my turn. Your Honor, I said, keeping my voice steady, my son didn't only betray me, he betrayed his mother's memory and the values we taught him. I don't want revenge. I want accountability. Judge Mitchell turned to Bryce. You may speak before sentencing. His voice shook. Your Honor. Dad, I'm sorry. I was desperate and stupid. Quinn pushed me. I ruined everything. Tears streamed down his face. I'm truly sorry. The apology sounded real. It was also far too late. Judge Mitchell didn't soften. Mr. Ashford, you didn't make a mistake. You made calculated criminal decisions. You exploited your father's illness, forged documents, committed elder abuse, and showed no remorse until discovery. She paused. This court sentences you to 7 years at the Oregon State Correctional Institution. Full restitution of $240,000 is ordered. You remain liable for all civil claims. Court costs are your responsibility. The gavel struck. The bailiff led Bryce away in handcuffs, his shoulders shaking. It was over. The weeks after sentencing blurred together. Asset recovery began immediately. Bryce owned almost nothing. His car sold for $8,000. His savings totaled $4,000. $12,000 recovered. The rest would be garnished after release, likely for decades. Quinn's annulment finalized quickly. She moved back with her parents, and according to Ruth, was already seeing someone new. Edward Westbrook publicly cut ties and continued his lawsuit. The Oregon Real Estate Board permanently revoked Bryce's license. He would leave prison at 40 with a record debt and no career. I processed everything alone in the Victorian house, surrounded by blueprints and memory. 4 months later, on a cold winter night, I finally grieved. I walked room to room, seeing ghosts everywhere. The living room, once Bryce's bedroom, held echoes of Lego towers and crayon drawings. Look, Dad, I built a skyscraper. The kitchen remembered flower fights and Nora teaching him to cook, all of us laughing. My office held quieter memories. I'd taught him to read blueprints there, his fingers tracing lines. If I learn this, I can design anything right. I sat at my drafting table and opened a drawer of old photos. Bryce at 5, at 12, broken after Nora died, at 22, proud at graduation. I cried for the first time since the trial, not in relief, in loss. I didn't destroy him, I whispered. He destroyed himself, but I'm still his father, and my son is gone. I was mourning 2 losses, the man in prison and the boy who no longer existed. 3 days later, a letter arrived from the Oregon State Correctional Institution. Bryce's handwriting stared up at me. I held it, then placed it in my drafting drawer beside 40-year-old blueprints. Plans Nora and I dreamed of, but never built. I wasn't ready to read it. Maybe I never would. The letter lay beside those old plans, designs for futures that would never exist. 6 months passed. Spring returned to Portland, and with it came something I hadn't felt in years possibility. The Victorian house felt like home again. Nora's roses, planted 20 years ago, bloomed in the garden. One April morning, I stood among them, breathing in their scent, and felt close to peace. My life had shifted in ways I never expected. Ruth Sinclair invited me to volunteer at the Portland Architecture Foundation 3 days a week, teaching young architects about historic preservation and structural integrity. It gave me purpose and reminded me why I loved architecture. Using $50,000 from the recovered funds, I established the Nora Ashford Scholarship for low-income architecture students. It felt right honoring her memory by opening doors she would have cared about. I kept the remaining $190,000 for retirement. Combined with my pension and modest investments, it was enough. I'd never wanted luxury-only security. I joined a support group for estranged parents. Listening to others, I realized how common this grief was, messy, unresolved, and rarely discussed. We weren't villains or martyrs, just people trying to survive betrayal without losing ourselves. Graham and Ruth became real friends. We met most Wednesdays for coffee, talking about books, buildings, and life, not lawsuits or trusts. I even went on a date, a woman from my book club with kind eyes and a love of mysteries. Nothing lasting came of it, but the openness to possibility mattered. Healing was happening. 8 months after sentencing, I did what I'd been avoiding. I drove to the Oregon State Correctional Institution. The visiting room was stark beige walls, plastic chairs, plexiglass dividers. Voices traveled through phones, no touch allowed. Bryce appeared thinner, his uniform loose, his hair longer. His eyes looked older, worn down by consequences. We sat in silence. "Dad," he said softly, "I didn't think you'd come. I almost didn't." "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't understand before what I took, what I destroyed." He told me about classes he was taking, lessons learned too late. Quinn didn't answer his letters. I watched carefully, no performance, just regret. "I forgive you," I said, "but I don't forget, and I can't fix this." "I know," he replied, tears forming. "I have 7 years to become someone better." "Then use them," I said. "I'll be here when you're released, but things won't be the same." "I understand. Thank you." We pressed our hands to the glass, a barrier neither of us could cross. Then I left. Outside, the spring air felt clean. This wasn't reconciliation, it was closure. People ask if I regret prosecuting my son. The answer is complicated. I regret the choices that led him there. I regret the loss of who he once was. But I don't regret protecting myself. I don't regret accountability. Love without boundaries isn't love, it's enabling. Sometimes loving someone means letting them face consequences. Back home, I worked at my drafting table on plans for the Architecture Foundation's new education center. Creating something lasting felt right. If your child betrayed you, remember this. You deserve respect, boundaries, and peace. Even with family, especially with family. Looking back now, I see how close I came to losing everything. Not just my money or my house, but my dignity, my peace, my sense of self. I'm sharing this true story, not for sympathy, but as a warning. Don't be like me. Don't wait until you're robbed blind to set boundaries with family. Don't confuse unconditional love with unconditional tolerance. I learned the hardest lesson a father can learn sometimes. Protecting yourself means letting go of someone you love. Thank God I kept records. Thank God I had friends like Graham and Ruth who reminded me of my worth when I doubted myself. And thank God I found the courage to choose accountability over enabling, because that choice, as painful as it was, saved my life. Here's what this grandfather learned after 64 years on Earth. Family doesn't give anyone the right to steal your security. Love requires respect, or it's just manipulation. And the hardest boundaries are the most necessary ones. If you're facing something similar, hear me clearly. You deserve protection. You deserve peace. Even from your own children, especially from your own children. These grandpa stories aren't just entertainment. They're lessons written in heartbreak. Every true story like mine carries a message. Self-preservation isn't selfish. It's survival. What happened in this Grandpa Stories episode cost me my relationship with my son, but it gave me back myself. That trade, as bitter as it tastes, was worth making. If this story moved you, please leave a comment. Sharing what city you're listening from, I'd love to see how far this lesson travels. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to this channel for more real-life true stories about courage, survival, and finding peace after betrayal. These Grandpa Stories are meant to protect you. Thank you for walking this journey with me.